Thank you. All right, for anyone that does join online, we are the Coordinating Earth, Space, and Science Data Preservation and Scholarly Publication Processes Working Group. This session is designed to provide everyone with a progress report on the status of where we've come so far, and have some open discussion about our current objectives and our remaining time and what's achievable, and if there are any points to discuss about pivoting or things we've missed. And so thank you, everyone, for coming. Okay. Before we begin, we're going to give our land acknowledgement, and we acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional lands we are meeting, and we pay our respect to their elders past and present. And I think because this is an RDA session, we have an embedded slide on getting involved with RDA. If you are interested, there is a link at the top to join RDA, and this working group obviously is under the auspices of RDA versus CODATA. Our agenda today, we'll finish up welcome and introductions. We will review how we got here. We'll look at the development of the idea for this working group and the statement of work, and a little bit of how we've set up all of our objectives and goals, and orient everybody to the work so far. Then we'll go into the progress report on that work, sort of dig into the details of what we've accomplished so far, what's still remaining. We'll have a bit of time on external developments and activities that are going on that we are connecting to or staying apprised of. So we'll go into a little bit of information for you all on that, provide that context on the touch points between these projects. And then an interactive session on reviewing the final 6 months that we have, and maybe brainstorming if we're on the right track, what we're missing, what we need to pivot to, if anything. And then we'll recap, confirm our next steps, and the ever so important 3 takeaways. Okay. So I'm going to launch us into what we're doing, the statement of work. And our long title of the session, we've reduced to sort of this catchphrase of repo to pub. And the overarching goal of this effort is to reduce the friction that's currently between repository and publisher workflows as they relate to and rely on the data underpinning the scholarly publication. So that's really the biggie. And to dig into this a little more, it's the result and one of the drivers of the misalignment of the data preservation process and the peer review process of the scholarly manuscript. So there are increasing requirements on sharing that data, the author's data that underpins their manuscripts, but there's little awareness or communication across all the stakeholders who are involved in both the manuscript and the data publication. That looks like funders and repositories, publishers and researchers all have no avenue for direct communication on these topics. And specifically on the needs and requirements of everyone and the timelines, which is what causes the friction. This increasing friction between the manuscript process and the data processing workflows is illustrated in this schematic here, where the domain repositories take a little bit longer to do that curation than the publishers move. But typically, if you see that start button, the authors and the researchers tend to start thinking about the data sharing once they've deposited or approached the publisher for their manuscript. So that's the sort of the crux of all of this. But yet domain repositories are critical for ensuring the data are truly fair, and that time and active participation of the researcher kind of slows the process down. On the publication side, manuscript processing timelines are much shorter, and they're less known by the author. So frequently, authors don't understand or know how much time they have from manuscript deposition to when they need that data set DOI. They tend to be panicky and ask for it right up front. Let's see. The publishers are challenged to work in the existing journal operations to develop and enforce data publication guidelines and align with domain curation needs. So we'll dig into this a little later, but you'll see that the publisher landscape and down into the journal landscape is so heterogeneous, and there are different policies and timelines and strategies and approaches that are all over the place. We kind of had an idea of this, but we didn't realize to what degree we were facing. So this is just sort of a corroboration of what we're talking about. The time taken for disciplinary curation tends to push researchers toward generalist repository solutions. And this is a study by Braunfelder and Stahl in 2024, where they looked at repository use of AGU journal publications. And you can see that obviously Zenodo is eclipsing some of the disciplinary repositories and even other generalist repositories. And that's primarily because Zenodo will give you a DOI the moment you deposit your data there. However, this is a problem because it ends up with less fair data. And this is a slide adapted from Leonard et al. And which has gotten used heavily, I will say, on many occasions. You can see here that the difference between generalist and repository and domain repositories in the endeavor to make fair data, for generalist repositories tend to fall short of the interoperability, reusability to that achieving fair data. And so when you see the previous slide, many of the authors are just dumping and getting a DOI, and in Zenodo, we're losing that opportunity to create reusable, truly reusable data. And the disciplinary repositories are standing by at the ready to hear how can we change, how can we do better, what are the things that we can do to better the situation. So those are the drivers. And the timeline to date looks like this. And it's a little long, and I think that's because as a repository owner, I started making sort of squawking noises way back in 2020 during COVID, and it was really hard to get the message out across the landscape to be able to say, does anybody else have this problem? And there are a few, including some in the room, who agreed that, yeah, that this is a problem. And so I struggled with outlets and where to gather momentum to do this, and just took a couple years to talk to the right people. So I presented at ESIPS and for a Coptis /AGU workshop back in 2021. In 2022, we started to find people who were aligned with this challenge. And let's see, geez, I don't know when, Natalie, you and I connected to, like, that was like the pivot point. I think that was 2023. Yeah. And so once I got like, I guess, groundswell of support for this, we approached RDA, the ESESIG within RDA, and through that support, we were able to develop a case statement, and that, I think now, statement of work, but that got endorsed in 2024. We started in 2025. We've been working on an IRB approval, which took some time. And so some of the objectives that we'll get into later were delayed by just logistics. So this is where we are. We were endorsed in August of 2024. Most of this year has been prepping for and doing interviews, which were part of our objectives. And now we're all presenting this sort of status report to you all and asking you to sort of help us kick the tires and see if we're on track and or if there's anything we should be looking to pivot toward. So here are the working group chairs, myself, Natalie Raia, who is like the glue keeping everything moving and together. Matt Warke is from Taylor and Francis. He was our willing and able-bodied publisher persona to join us, and Lesley Wyborn. So endorsed in 2024, we currently have 72 members in the working group. If you want to see more about it, the repo to pub bit.ly there will take you to our webpage. And then we can get into the statement of work and looking at the value proposition. Really broadly, we're trying to ease the bottlenecks that happen on the repository side and facilitate data review and increase the transparency of work for authors, both on the publication side, the data publication side, and the scholarly publication side. So we want to bring all of these stakeholders together. This, we know and we acknowledge, this builds on previous work and existing work, both in RDA, COPTIS, an effort called Tier 2, which we will see a summary slide for later, and Force 11. So we also want to establish a common understanding of these workflows between the stakeholders on the repository side and the publisher side, and then reach a consensus on how to develop a set of recommendations that would help streamline and ameliorate the current situation. So that looks like some objectives on the journal side, establishing a shared understanding of needs concerning the data availability and the citation, and the preferred timing of when they need them, how long it takes a repository or disciplinary repository to get them. And so questions we're looking at and digging into is what are the types of publishing policies that exist right now? What's happening in practice versus in policy? And what are the specific challenges that they need solved related to data publication and availability? And then on the repository side, similarly, we're looking to establish that shared understanding concerning the relationships and timelines with their researchers and best practices for appraisal of data, deposition, and then the disciplinary specific curation. How are these earth, space, and environmental science repositories dealing with data embargo, provisional data sets, and peer review access? What's working, what's not working, what's missing in this whole workflow. And so all of that is aimed at some target adopters, the first being repositories and repository managers. And that will look like a set of recommendations for guidelines and policies and education to help their transparency with their authors when they come for disciplinary curation. And we anticipate that being adopted through or facilitated by organizations such as the Council of Data Facilities. I don't know how we didn't get COPTIS in there, but ESIP, RDA, WDS, EGU, and AGU engagement. And then on the journal publication side, or the editor side, looking at journal policy, author guidelines, author education, and that would be facilitated at those touch points where we find the publication or the publishers and the editors most attending, so societies and meetings like AGU, EGU, and COPTIS. And then secondarily, the benefit will come to funders through educational, activities and researchers, secondarily through their engagement with the repositories and the publishers. So our timeline, we're 14 months in, but we got a little bit of a late start. We have gotten to document a set of repository use cases that demonstrate the bottlenecks in publication process. So we're doing both repositories and publishers right now. The IRB, gaining IRB approval took a little while, and then setting up the interviews has been sort of challenging. But we're in active process now. I don't know offhand how many we have total, but Natalie will get into that later. So if we were on track, we'd probably be a little later in this 6 to 12 month where we were analyzing and creating sort of that visual model of publication workflows for journals and repositories, what we're finding. And I don't want to give away too many spoilers here, but this was sort of going into it thinking we had a general idea of this, but the details have really sort of been striking. So we're behind, and in that 12 to 18 month, we would be working on the recommendations and vetting those against the two major stakeholders. So one of the things we want to talk to you all today is get your sense on the remaining time and achievability or extension and things like that. And I think that's all I have for the introduction. So pass it off to Natalie.
Well, is this on? Okay, I guess so. I just want to reiterate a point Danny made, which is to thank you all for being here. I think that actually this feels very kind of symbolic, I think, of the nature of the challenge. And I think that I just want to acknowledge that the what we're working together as a working group towards is something that has been and continues to be a so-called wicked problem, I think, in the data publication and scholarly communication space. And so I think it'll be great to have your feedback today and your thoughts on what we're uncovering. And I think that the data that we're collecting will tell a story that is important to be told and documented in the way that we're doing. So our main method of kind of data collection and wrestling with this problem are through semi-structured interviews. We can talk about this more if there's further questions, but we kind of, in the spin-up of the working group, went through some evaluation of how we might tackle the problem, landed on the interviews as a way to capture the really rich, complex internal workflows that are part and parcel and kind of non-negotiable for wrestling with and distilling recommendations for these stakeholders. So the interviews are each about 60 minutes, and so this is a time-intensive, labor-intensive process, but one that's been very informative. And then, so we collect the interviews with the transcripts, and I'll talk a little bit more about how we're going to engage the working group in the imminent weeks and months to engage with that data and have discussion of these interviews as a way to surface common themes amidst these very heterogeneous workflows. If you're interested, I've put on the QR code on the right a QR code to a spreadsheet that was populated by the working group over the course of a number of working sessions. These were repositories and publishers that the working group members suggested we interview. And the working group then prioritized these publishers and repositories with the awareness that we can't interview ad nauseum, of course. So prioritizing based on types of repositories, size of repositories, different domains, different countries, trying to get good representation there. Yeah. It might be.
No. Well, I don't.
Here, do you want to?
Really matters, but
well, we do have people online.
We do?
Yes, we do.
Oh, nice. Okay. That's excellent. What?
I think we have some people that have joined us
online.
online. Yeah.
So,
yeah, I think so. They signed in.
So what I wanted to say here too, just to add on to what Natalie was describing, the interview process and the development of the questions and the development of the list, that was subsequent after our original statement of work was to develop a static set of use cases and look at a use case template. And over the course of the working group meetings, we decided that that wasn't going to capture enough of the nuance, and I think that use case templates are challenging if you've never seen them or used them before, and so that was a little bit of deliberation over the course of a few working group meetings, which are only monthly. And so I think there was some time in the refinement of the actual strategy to get that information out. So I just wanted to kind of put that context in there because it does relate to where we are in our timeline. Thanks.
And it was an early indication of the heterogeneity that we would see, particularly on the publisher side, because the feedback we were getting from the publisher participants was, I am not going to know how to fill this out because this is a journal by journal thing. So we'll get to that in a moment. The interview questions themselves, we had really fantastic input and editing, very active editing from a large portion of the working group. So we're grateful to everyone's edits, the suggested edits that turned the document rainbow. So that was a very helpful, and what we ended up with, I'll show in a moment, are some core sets of questions. We've completed 5 repository and 5 interview publisher stake. Wow, coffee. We've completed 5 interviews each for repositories and publishers. So we're about halfway to our target. And there's a spin up, so we're kind of in a rhythm now, and we're just completing the scheduling for the remaining stakeholders. What types of questions are we asking? I'm going to talk about repositories here and then publishers on the next slide and give you just examples of the full list of questions, and there will be QR codes if you want to view those questions. On the repository side, we're digging into all stages of the data submission. Wow, I thought we were a little quiet. All components of the data submission process and the touch points with researchers. So, for instance, on the pre-data submission side, we ask, when in the research lifecycle are researchers coming to share and publish the data in your repository? Related to more detailed questions about data submission and ingest. So what data are submitted to your repository? Is it all of the project data? Is it raw supporting data, data associated only with a publication, et cetera? On the data curation side, 2 examples. At what stage in the curation or publication process does your repository mint an identifier for the data? And then do you mint provisional DOIs or have other measures in place to support access to data sets during the journal peer review process? And I think these questions are have been quite compelling for the outputs and recommendations that we will be able to drive towards. We also asked directly, do you face pain points specifically related to impacts of publisher data deposition mandates? On the publisher side, we ask questions such as, do all your journals operate under one data sharing policy, or are there multiple levels applied to different journals that you publish? And if there's multiple levels, which there typically are, who determines the appropriate level for each journal? Do your journals currently have policies for data availability, directing the manuscript authors towards specific domain-specific repositories on the journal webpage or in other forms? Do you recommend or require repository deposition as a mandatory field during the submission process? Describe the process. And who is responsible for checking the data availability statement, and questions relating to the impacts of who does that and how much time it takes. And if we had to pick one quote to summarize the mess, it would be this quote from Publisher A: "It's just a Wild West out there." So I want to touch in the next slide on 4 core emerging themes and then I'll present just very light touch sound bites from the repository side of the interviews and the publisher side, and then talk about how we're going to engage more deeply with this rich data. We're finding that the publisher side is prohibitively heterogeneous. The publishers knew this, but having cross-stakeholder recognition of this, I think, will be an important outcome for this working group. And there are significant issues of scale, which I think Danny started to touch on earlier, which is that journals are, that publishers may be dealing with portfolios of thousands of journals. And so they're all at different data requirement levels, and it is not a situation where one size fits all, and having any increase in levels of data availability, data requirements can be a significant ask on the kind of business end of things. Really interestingly, unexpectedly, and I think credit to RDA last fall, conversations that happened at RDA last fall and then borne out in some of our interviews, is the emergent role of learned societies as important levers in partnership with publishers to move the needle forward here on these challenges. And Matt Warke is unable to be with us today, but is coming to us with a 5-minute video and a couple slides to speak to that. There's perhaps equal heterogeneity, but different on the domain repository side with respect to core elements or functionality that intersect with scholarly publication processes. So things like minting provisional or draft DOIs, supporting embargoes, supporting blind peer review access, or just access pre-publication at all. And so I think that we have some tangible results here to dig in on, and kind of quantitatively put some visuals and numbers on the degree to which some of these things are or are not happening in the ESES domain repository space. We also may be seeing some interesting conversation happening about the potential role of institutional domain and research data management librarians. This is not a the institutional repositories were not a group that we initially had intended to have as a stakeholder, but we received a lot of interest in having us interview a couple of those repositories. And so when we're completed with the interviews, we'll have 4. Right now we have 2 represented, and very interesting and different perspectives from the domain repositories. I have a couple quotes here to give an example of what kind of responses and perspectives we're hearing. The first quote here speaks to really persistent, entrenched researcher culture, which I think will be no surprise to anyone here, but getting the researcher culture to say, I've done my analysis, now I can deposit my data, and then I write my manuscript. Getting that order of operations. If they could just do this, it would give us so much more space, essentially on the repository side, to do that really valuable curation. But how do you change the juggernaut? The culture is so huge and has so much momentum from its legacy workflow. When we asked Domain Repository B whether they mint any provisional DOIs or have measures to support access of datasets during the time of journal peer review, Repository B told us, we've done sort of workarounds with specific user accounts for reviewers to get to the data. We're not yet doing these preliminary DOIs, but we really need to do that. On the publisher side, interesting, I would say, willingness to work across boundaries, which has been nice to uncover. In the first quote here, I think there's things that publishers can do in terms of raising awareness about their policies, but ultimately, if you get to the time of submission and you haven't thought about where you're putting your data, it's too late. And so it has to be a combination of stakeholders, and I don't think it's about saying, well, it all has to be done by repositories or funders or institutions or publishers. The challenging thing is, though we hear this a lot in the interviews, it becomes a pointing game. So I think that's part of this, and not in a bad way per se, but it's a problem. We need to figure out collectively who's going to take responsibility for what components. In the second quote, in terms of where publishers can help, I think publishers working with repositories, coming up with common standards, agreed ways to talk to researchers, common resources, so a standard list of repositories you should go to, standard types of checklists, given your particular discipline, what the community norms are, and publishers can then put those messages on their website, link to URLs that would contain this information, and it would make checking at every level easier. So I think this is a really interesting perspective coming from a publisher wanting to be able to link out to community vetted norms and recommendations. Yeah. Yeah, we're gonna get you the mic. And can you just say your name and where you're coming from?
Okay, Kirsten Ninat from EarthChem and Astromaterials Data System. I just wanted to clarify, when you say publisher, who did you talk to? Somebody from the publisher offices or to the editors?
Fantastic question. Thanks for asking that. That was part of the challenge, was figuring out who do we talk to, and it's not sitting up high, and that's part of the problem here. Danny, do you want to speak to some of that? You have some.
Right.
Yeah.
So we didn't get up high. It's not the head honcho publisher that is a decision maker, and part of that was intentional because they're not seeing what's down in the weeds. But the interesting thing is that it also works, like all of these quotes that Natalie has shared. These people are passionate. The ones that are on the ground, they see the problems, they see the issues, but then what we heard was that they're hamstrung to communicate up, and that communication up stops at a financial line. Like, it would cost too much for me, my voice will not be heard, and they're quite passionate about the problem, and they're definitely willing to come to the table to discuss solutions, but they don't seem to have a lot of faith that there's a conduit to get up to the publishers, like the administrative level, the decision-making level up there. So it's a great question.
I have more to say, but
we'll have
a discussion section. So.
And I think that this point is perfect that you've raised, because I think this is a core thing of what we would like some feedback on in terms of, do we pivot? How do we, I think we have to reckon with this because the message has been so clear on the publisher side that that movement is very, very difficult. And so we need to make progress. And then the final quote, I think is related to this. So when we move a journal to a different data sharing policy level, it's a big discussion about how much content we're just gonna have to turn around and immediately unsubmit, and that is a fearful step. So this speaks to the motivations on the publisher side that are very real and not going anywhere anytime soon. So we presented those little sound bites, but there's 10 hours of interviews currently to make sure that we get the working group engaged. We are de-identifying and providing partial quotes keyed by interview questions so that people can actually look at the direct responses. And so over the next couple working group sessions, I think we're looking to have working sessions so people can engage with that, and we can talk about what that looks like and what the tempo needs to be to keep up with a pace here. But the working group, we need your eyes on the data, and we need your thoughts on the themes that are emerging. Our next meeting is actually next week, because no rest for the weary. We will be doing a post-IDW debrief and kind of getting our bearings on scheduling, if we need to increase the tempo, or figuring out imminent next steps and kind of distributing the work. So join us for that. The QR code takes you to our RDA WG group page. If you log into your RDA account, click join group, I think it's on the right side of the page in a green button, and then you will get our meeting announcements. Okay, now we have time for questions and discussion, and then we'll flip over shortly to talking about some external efforts that have also made this a very interesting time to be doing this working group. Okay, yep, open it up. And just state your name and where you're coming from.
I'm Lesley Wyborn, and I'm one of the co-chairs, and I do think you two underestimated the amount of effort that Natalie had to put into the IRB with the University of Arizona. That was a very, very slow process, and I think that's what has delayed our track. So again, I'd just like to acknowledge the tremendous amount of effort she put into getting that through.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of negotiating the external stakeholders too. So Matt Warke from a publisher and myself from Hui, because we are the interviewers.
Yeah.
That dealing with the other institutions was challenging too. Actually, I think Matt was probably easier than.
And I will say that, so I think there is an interesting conversation on the tail side of this working group after, you know, we kind of close, of what are the lessons learned in terms of methods that are effective. But I will say for engaging with publishers, I think having the IRB made it so that we could get access no problem, by and large.
And even with that IRB access, there were the internal review board.
Institutional Review Board.
Sensitive surrounding people. You're going to interview humans.
Yeah.
There might be sensitive information. Most institutions have them, and if they don't, so for example, Hui has a really, my institution has a really lax kind of IRB process, and they just said, well, show us what Arizona, give us everything that Arizona has, and we'll review it. And Arizona's is pretty robust. And so Natalie had to do all that work, and then it was a waiting game. Even once everybody complied with the requested information, it was sort of just into the ether for weeks.
Yeah. And you will see, I mean, this week there's actually been, it just doesn't get talked about, right? Because you kind of, you get it and then you're exempt. But this week there's other groups at RDA that are doing work that require IRB approvals as well. But in this case, I think it's very helpful to talk openly about that.
You have to.
Yeah.
I agree.
We did this for the astromaterials
Right.
survey that downstairs.
Yeah.
And to Natalie's point, it did open the doors for the publishers. There was some level of relief, and in spite of that, there's still a lot of content that they were not at liberty to discuss, right?
Yeah.
So.
Natalie, I'm Kirsten Elger, GFZ. I'm surprised that you say that even you reached out to some journal editors. It's difficult to reach out the top level decision body, because my impression of the COPTES implementation is a bit vice versa, that the publishers have signed the COPTES statement of commitment, but it did not reach down to the editors who were the little kings in their journals. So that's, I think, a reason for still having it not fully implemented.
Yeah, that's fantastic feedback to receive, because maybe it points to, I wonder if it points to something that COPTES can do to say, hey, you signed this thing, but here's the criteria and you're not meeting it.
Peter. Sorry. Kirsten Lehnert again. There's so much experience over more than 10 years in COPTES, and there was the Enabling Fair Data project that was so related to it, and it really showed many of what you're now confirming with these interviews. And from my perspective, the most impactful changes we have actually received in my domain is staying very focused within the domain, because that's where you talk the same language to editors who struggle with really understanding what they have to do and so on. And so I wonder what your insights have been with respect to this challenge of publishers having so many different domains within their journals. And this will easily get outside the earth sciences. You have journals that publish not only earth science data or ocean sciences, and that has been always the blockage, the hindrance of making progress is like, oh, in genomics, it's all set. And it's, so how far do you go generic versus domain specific, or even, individual disciplines within the earth sciences?
And I think Matt's talk will speak to maybe maybe a salient point that's coming out to that point as a possible solution with the role of the learned societies, which was not a stakeholder that was scoped into the working group originally. Yeah, but has emerged from the publisher side. Speaking when we and I want to also re-emphasize that when we did speak with publishers, we're speaking to those champions that are aware of the issues and want to do good and are trying to find ways to translate it up. So in that sense, I think we were very fortunate to have publisher expertise in the form of Matt and other working group members telling us, hey, hit that level and you'll get some information there. And that's, I think, been very helpful.
One other thing that just came to my mind is new journals that try something different. And I'm just thinking of that new journal on frontiers in geochemistry and cosmochemistry that Marte has been involved with. They have really, from the beginning of setting up the journal that just started last year, I think, this year was you are. So there is, so much more consideration of how to deal with data, with code, with samples, and, demonstrating that to other journals, how it could work and where the problems are, I think would be really important.
Yeah. We also found that the data science journals have it down. And for whatever reasons, their authorship doesn't have a problem with fully implementing any of their policies. Right.
Yeah, Kirsten Elger again. All this, I think from the geo's perspective, I see that, and I received this on the other end when the data publication requests pop into my repository. This is well on the way, and there are more and more journals who actually require, including HEU journals, who require these data and review link. Interestingly, you mentioned it as preliminary DOIs, which, anyway, but it's an access link to the data. But it still doesn't solve the problem that none of the repositories will know when a paper is published. So I still receive, I always say, please make sure you send me and let me know when I shall publish the data. But then there are still emails saying, hey, I have just realized the DOI link is corrupt. I don't know what happened, but the paper was already out half a year ago. What happened? I said, well, the only thing that happened was you didn't tell me that your paper is out. And I think this is another, I think you wanted to address this also in your working group, because this is a highly relevant thing. We can get help of the publishers when they really make a thorough typesetting and check all the links, because then they will find that there is an unregistered DOI, which then leads to immediate reaction by the researcher, because they say, solve it or not, or your paper will not be published, and you can see how fast they contact us. But it's something that I think we have to work on both sides, but yeah.
Yeah.
It's also really interesting that they're worried about authors like losing authorship. Like they feel if some of them don't fully, they know that the editorial process, the policy that's in place and maybe robust is not fully getting checked or followed, because they're worried about if they were to follow it by the letter, they would lose authorship. They would lose, like, people would go somewhere else.
Oh, they do.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's amazing to me that if you all towed the line and held it, then authors wouldn't have anywhere to, like.
But it's a competitive world
Yeah.
in publishing.
Yeah. Did you have a question?
Kind of, but maybe you might be answering it next. I guess it leads on from that, the incentives. Yep. Yep. I just was curious, the incentives from the publishers, if other domains have solved it and it's a specific, domain-specific problem, or is it a journal financial, like, incentive problem? And if it's journals are worried authors are going to go elsewhere, authors want to go elsewhere because they want their data to be visible and findable and easy, then you could, like, create a protest movement as well, where you've got this preferred pathways and the free market sorts it out.
Yeah. I do think that we are, we wouldn't have the numbers to back it up, but the journals that are on the side of the spectrum of, like, figured it out, doing it right, quote unquote right, the scale is different. So they're either with a much more independent publisher or publisher partner, and they're dealing with smaller scale submission, and so then it makes it workable. And so very quickly, if that changes, then yeah.
But I do think this is a really good point, is looking at, where it is working, actually. And I feel that there are communities, domains where, at least part of the problems have been solved. And it has been, for myself, really eye-opening to listen in these efforts of sustainable standards for chemistry and so on, the crystallography, the genomics community and so on, where it's clear you can't get published unless your data is here, unless it is in this standard, unless the samples are registered in the protein data bank or whatever. So it is the community and the learned societies to bring them in as much as possible. That would need to be solved, I think, before you start talking to the publishers.
Mm-hmm.
So I think now we will move on to a series of short talks speaking to external efforts that we have been aware of and working alongside and in coordination, communication with. A lot of nice and complementary work in this space right now. So we wanted to highlight that. The first one will be from co-chair Matt Warke of Taylor and Francis. He nicely recorded a video for us on the role of learned societies. And we will cross our fingers and hope all goes well.
Hi everyone, I hope you're having a good meeting. Sorry I couldn't join on this occasion. Just a quick slide to speak to the role of learned societies in the publishing process, the data publication process, and how we're identifying that as a stakeholder group that we need to really think about. It's well known in the publishing space, but perhaps not as well known in the repository space, that learned societies that publish their journals with commercial and non-commercial publishing partners, those societies often retain ownership of the journal and therefore have the right to set editorial policy, and that would include the data sharing policy level of their journal. Now, it is a partnership, and so depending on how much of the infrastructure and staffing and capability of the publisher the learned society is going to rely on, that is going to determine how that data sharing policy looks in practice. So for the point of this project, this RDA project that we're working on, we are looking at workflows and we're looking at snag points and pain points between the two. And as a result, this kind of fact around learned society journals, the fact that they can set their own editorial policy or may not have their own staffing, introduces a significant amount of heterogeneity into the workflows of journals. And so though it may be tempting to see journals published by one publisher as all behaving or should be behaving in the same way, that's actually usually not the case. And that's something that's been coming out in our interviews. So to give you an example of that, a publisher may have a policy of enforcing a data sharing policy at the point of submission, okay? And if a learned society is publishing their journal with that publisher, and they are relying entirely on the publisher to enforce those checks and make sure that that is happening, the publisher will use that workflow where they are checking at the point of submission. If, however, a journal, a learned society has some staff, they have an editorial office that's external to the publisher that has a role in processing the manuscript as it comes through, they may choose to, and if they choose to take those checks on board, they may choose to do them at a different point in the manuscript's journey, for example, before acceptance. And this can introduce, quite a lot of difference within journals that are published on the surface, what appears to be by the same publisher, but actually the fact that ownership often and control of editorial policy lies with the learned society can mean that there's quite a lot of difference in workflow within one publisher. And that creates different snag points, different pain points for different journals and different communities, different publishers. And this is something that we've been talking about quite a lot in terms of trying to find generalized workflows and generalized guidelines to help with understanding how the data deposition, data curation, how that can better integrate with the manuscript's journey in the publication process in the journal. So that's just to say, basically at this point, what's coming out of our conversations, what's coming out of our interviews, is this need to consider learned societies as a key stakeholder group within the scope of interest of this RDA group. So that's basically what this kind of cog here is meant to represent. So we've talked before about the role of authors, the role of repositories, the role of publishers. We've even talked a little bit about the role of funders in this RDA project, but we also need to consider learned societies and the role that they have in determining data sharing policy levels and workflows within journals in the Earth, Environmental and Space Sciences.
Brief reflection. Yeah.
Just quickly, Matt drew us this diagram, and I think we need to pull the learned societies wheel down to run around with the publishers, and that we need a third wheel, which is for Kirsten, which has the editors.
Yeah.
This actually came out of our session that we had at P24 when Kira McNeice of, Cambridge Publishers stood up and said, do you understand how complex the relationships are between the publishers and the repositories? Sorry, and the learned societies, how influential it is. And we had not, it really came out, and that's what Matt and Kira have been trying to put together since our last meeting.
I want to briefly touch on Tier 2. I, of course, won't speak. We have been in communication with the leads of Tier 2. Tier 2 stands for Trust, Integrity, and Efficiency in Research through Next Level Reproducibility. It's a €2 million grant from the European Commission, Horizon Europe, and UKRI. They have been working for a number of years with a number of pilots. Pilot 8 is the closest touch point to this working group, which was designed to develop with publishers and test an editorial reference handbook for reproducibility and fairness. And so this work was slightly preceded the start of our working group and then was really hitting its stride as we were figuring out all of our stuff. And so we have been in communication tightly with them for a while now. They looked over our publisher interviews to make sure that we weren't duplicating efforts. And I think that there's some nice compliments there. They are very publisher focused. We have more data on the repository side than I think we've had before in prior efforts in RDA space, for example. And so it's good to see, I think, multiple efforts going for different stakeholders. I have linked their website there since I'm not going to be able to speak to detail, but we wanted to highlight their work, and we're grateful to them for their continued communication with us. And then we will pass it over to a new effort from Force 11.
Oops, that's okay. Yeah, hi. So I'm Shannon Farrell. I'm here on behalf of Force 11, but in my real job, I'm at the University of Minnesota as the Research Data Services Lead and the director of our data repository at the University of Minnesota. I am leading this group that you see, this title up here, Cross-Industry Collaboration to Harmonize Data Sharing Workflows. It's a mouthful, but it's through Force 11, and I co-lead this with Shanda Hunt, who is also at the University of Minnesota. So we started our work in March 2025. So Shanda and I both work on the data repository at the University of Minnesota, and we saw a clear need, just as has been talked about all morning, for data repositories and journals to work more closely together. And we were clearly coming at this from the repository side because we insist on curation in our data repository. We are both curators, and we check the data for good documentation. We make sure files open and so on, because we want the data to be easily reused, and to provide an incentive for researchers to go through this curation process. We don't provide DOIs for their data sets until we've completed curation. So this, to us, this ensures that the data set is as fair as possible, but when folks are writing associated articles and are going to publish in journals that require data sharing, they often come to us saying they need an immediate DOI before curation. We also see the data set as a static output, so once it's deposited and goes through the curation process, it's supposed to be complete and final. But during the peer review process of an article, sometimes the researcher wants to also change the data set, understandably. So you can see that these two processes are at odds. So our hope for this group is that we can have better understanding of how these processes often conflict, and hopefully we can reach agreement on how to make data sharing easier for repositories, journals, and researchers. Okay, so when we began work on the project, we set some original goals to prioritize cross-industry collaboration for all stakeholders in the data sharing ecosystem, to publish a list of challenges for each stakeholder in order to foster a baseline understanding for each group and across groups, and then to publish a set of guidelines for journals and data repositories to facilitate them working better together. The working group has 30 members, with about 15 of them that are regularly attending our meetings. It's an international group. The majority of participants are from the USA. However, we do have folks from Europe, South America, and Australia. It does represent various industries, so journals, repositories, researchers, and some others, even in private industry. However, most of the folks are from libraries and data repositories, as you would probably expect. So when we began working on the project, in order to generate the unique perspectives of the different stakeholders, we split up into 4 subgroups. You can see them here, so journals and publishers, authors and researchers, data repositories, and then we have one that's a little bit different. We call it disciplinary differences, but this one was to address the different challenges that various disciplines have in the data sharing landscape, because there are some unique aspects, as I'm sure you are aware. The first output that we worked on in the subgroups was a list of challenges that are encountered with data sharing. This was followed up by us drafting recommendations within the subgroups based on their perspective of how all the groups can work together as a whole. When this is all compiled together, it's going to be a toolkit with challenges, recommendations, and then an executive summary. We're going to be working on workflow visuals and then possibly templates that can be used for the various stakeholders. While we were working within our subgroups, we added in a couple more stakeholder perspectives because this kept repeatedly coming up, so funders and then academic institutions. They are also impacted by the challenges with data sharing. So initially, when we were beginning this work, we talked about conducting surveys with stakeholders or doing a systematic review of the literature, but with the limited time frame that we have, which is less than 1.5 years, we decided these activities are out of scope. So we're hoping to present our findings at publisher conferences like the Council of Science Editors, and we would also like to conduct more projects following the dissolution of this working group. So one big goal of the group is to spend a lot of time learning. We know there's many other groups out there working on this topic and related or similar topics. Obviously, our presence here at this conference is because we're connected with this working group, the Earth, Space, and Environmental Science Data Preservation and Scholarly Publication Processes Working Group. During the last few months, we have also been doing a lot of reading to find current gaps in the work. We've discovered that even among stakeholders who agree on the problem, there's disagreement on how to approach solutions. So since beginning our work, we've now included 2 more stakeholders, like I mentioned before, funding agencies, institutes of higher education. We're also planning to expand the toolkit to include a glossary, resources list, and Zotero library for sharing. And finally, we're going to include a template for a data sharing policy for journals that don't have policies yet to use. We'll also be making a visual of timelines and workflows to illustrate some potentially how these could all flow together. And that is it. And this is our website.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Any questions online or in the room for Shannon? Oh, okay. I'm going to pretend like there is.
I'm just curious, you showed that, you know, you have a lot of repositories in there. Are those institutionals and generic repositories
Both.
or domain specific?
Both institutional and domain repositories. So.
Okay. Yeah, from my perspective, I'm obviously at this point, you know, hearing about all these efforts, questioning myself where Coptis fits into the picture. You know, how it seems there's so many parallel efforts that at some point there's going to be a pushback from publishers saying, you know, I can't participate in 5 different efforts. And so we have a working group here, we have Force 11, we have Coptis, we probably have more efforts going on in other domains.
That we
How
don't know
can
about,
that
yes.
actually be coordinated to be more impactful in the end?
We were wondering that too, and we were sort of hoping that we could maybe form some sort of broader group, like working in conjunction with this working group and elsewhere to make just a broad working group for RDA, you know, something like that. But we haven't fully formed that thought yet. But I agree. We probably, well, I don't know how to say this. We're trying to look at the big picture, and so that's been difficult in different ways from when you're looking at a discipline. So I don't know. We'd love to work with other groups, though.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, talking about other groups, another really important group is that the Global Indigenous Data Alliance have got together, and it's coordinated by AGU and NIST, I think, the other one, and they're developing journal publication guidelines for the governance of Indigenous data in scholarly publications. And so, yeah, Kirsten's saying, here comes another group. And I look at the work that they're doing, and it's not released yet, but it is incredibly detailed and more complex than what the COPDES statement was, but they're going to go into exactly the same battles, which is why I love that diagram. And I sort of want to connect with them and say, well, look, if you're going on this journey, this working group is actually trying to sort out where can you be more impactful to get these things properly looked at by, like we want some things like just the repository. We're just after the DOI, but you know, where's the most effective place we can connect? And I'm not sure we're going to find that out easily.
I just see COPTIS as being sort of this centralized point where a lot of these things could be vetted against each other. I mean, you're bringing, COPTIS brings the publisher piece in, the CDF, you know, I don't know. Well, right. The CDF, I should put the qualifier as could be engaged in this as well through COPTIS in the sense of the coalition sense of publishers and repositories, and it just seems like it would be a more unifying forum for either comparison, vetting, whatever activities. It seems like that's the appropriate place. I struggle. We were just talking about how many publishers frequently or consistently come to RDA to be able to engage with them on this content. And I think that, you know, COPT is putting out this wide blast on a topic, and knowing that there are multiple efforts, it seems like we could get a lot of feedback on, hey, this is the right approach, this isn't the right approach, you guys are too similar, you should work together. Content like that would be really helpful, I think. Yeah.
I was just going to say the reason that we started the Force 11 working group is because we knew that they had broad connections with publishers, and that was the group that we really wanted to get access to, and so that was why we went there versus RDA to start. But yeah.
I mean, does it speak to, I guess, coalition? Yeah, COPTIS has that disciplinary portion of it baked into its name, right? Yeah. I mean, I guess I was gonna like wonder in an exploratory way whether there's any advantage to whether COPTIS, what would it look like in a world where COPTIS sits within the RDA space, or a COPTIS-like interest group or something as the central hub from which you would have targeted efforts that go down to the working group level.
Maybe now it's on. I mean, we had, COPTIS obviously was founded as an effort to unite in the Earth and space sciences. Its origin was even more specific in geochemistry, which was the Editors' Roundtable. And the concept of bringing publishers and repositories together became sort of adopted in the broader Earth and space science community. Over those many years of COPTIS, I felt that, you know, it's been a really important synergy between COPTIS being at a higher level, talking to the publishers, and still staying within individual subdomains like geochemistry, meeting with the editors and really solving the on the ground, you know, in the trenches problems. That has changed more than what the top down from COPTIS has changed, at least for that domain. And I think that's a lesson, you know, where we need to configure somehow a system where you have efforts residing in very specific domains, but having these overarching activities, you know, with Force 11 being really multidisciplinary, then earth science efforts, and then, you know, very, very specific aspects of what our editors struggling with.
So does Force 11 have a similar structure as an IG, as an RDA interest group? No. So I guess I'm wondering if like it's just a working group, which is very short. Yeah. So I guess I'm wondering if hearing these things and kind of that need for something that's cross-disciplinary and that has that longevity, does that call for RDA IG that then where Coptis sits as this domain node that feeds up and supports that, there would be coordination with any Force 11 efforts, and then there would be opportunities for more targeted working group efforts.
I think, I really like that idea because I feel that the current implementation of Coptis in ESIP has not been successful because no publisher comes to ESIP, but RDA is a place where publishers are present. So I think it's something we should look into.
A dedicated interest group towards this challenge, this problem. Who's volunteering? Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Yeah.
So if we're making this broader, it doesn't really stand under the COP,
Right.
right? Because you want to get outside of the
Domain.
Earth and Space Sciences, the domains.
The new Earth and Space Sciences community practice. Yeah.
We serve a niche because we are in ESS, and it's almost like you need an umbrella one that sits over the top so that we can connect.
Yeah.
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 But the COP is not the place for it. Like, it needs to be outside.
Oh,
because
sorry,
it is
the community. Sorry, COP desk.
community of practice.
No,
right?
I don't believe it needs.
Yeah.
It's got to get out of that.
Yeah.
That's only meant to coordinate earth and environmental science
Right.
activities.
Right.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be run through that.
Yeah.
So it's whether or not what you're proposing a interest group.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, why don't we go ahead with it?
Lesley, what about,
Do you have the mic? Share the mic. Yeah.
what about using sort of World Fair in some way for reaching out to other disciplines, because we don't know necessarily all the stuff that's going on in chemistry and
I would suggest that why don't we do it as a joint World Fair RDA interest group, because we do that, like this CoData does join in a lot of the RDA groups. They could do a World Fair one. It's just that RDA gives you a reliable backbone, regular meetings, and I think you are connecting in RDA with the publishers. They do seem to turn up to the not the editors, but you get the publishers. So, oh my God, sorry, can I finish up one interest group before I start another one?
No problem.
No, I mean, if somebody wants to go
Do you?
ahead.
So the process for an interest group, does there need to be a BOF, or no?
No, you can go
You can
straight.
just
You
get
can
rolling.
say that this is a spin-off from this, and like if you want to, a BOF at the next meeting is one way to kick off and get a statement of work, see what the level of interest is in it, but it's not essential. But one of the it's going to be an interest group, isn't it? Yeah. Now, if you're doing a working group, for those of you who want to know the dirty tricks, starting off as a BOF gives you lead time.
Yeah.
That's not as important in
Yeah.
an interest group.
so
But it'd be worth doing a survey across all the RDA, and I could talk to Natasha, how many RDA groups there are that involve something to do with the word publisher or publishing. Yeah. Because there certainly are a few. How many are active, I don't know, but Natasha Simons was pretty active in a couple of them.
There was in the very early days of RDA, there was a big interest group on data publication, and that had a lot of publishers in it.
Okay. Well, good. This was not an expected outcome, and I think it's great. We have some consensus. Yeah. Yeah.
Looking at the next plenary being fully virtual,
Yeah.
we should avoid having a buff there because you will only reach half of the persons.
Okay.
There are many,
Okay.
due to the scheduling, it's not possible to participate from Europe or from the US or from Australia.
Okay.
So I think it's reaching out through the working group or through the channels we have already is possibly better than.
Noted. Yeah.
Although, let's be realistic, when they do a virtual BOF, they do encourage you to try and have it in like an Asia, Oceania friendly time and a US, Europe friendly time. So if someone's prepared to put the effort in, that's what they do. They actually encourage you for all of them to have a double session.
Yeah. So, in terms of next steps for the IG, do we have people who are interested in taking point on organizing the spinning up preparations? Yeah. Oh yeah, there'll be yeah. So, but I'm looking for a point person or persons. Okay. So I'm seeing the second row here as the point. Yeah. Oh, yeah. We're not going to have everybody today, but if we. Three right there. Perfect. Yeah. 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 That gives. Yeah, so it makes sense for the next in person, and that gives these groups time to close. Cape Town, I think. Yeah. Oh.
Cape Town is 27th, the International Data Week. I think London is before.
London, P27 is at London, and a bit of a kerfuffle because it is in person only. They are not
Oh.
any virtual options.
Oh, really?
Yes. Wow. And so if you don't like that idea, please start writing letters to Hillary.
Okay.
Complaining.
We've lost our focus on our stuff.
Yeah, so we've converged on that, which is, I think, a great outcome for this session at least. We've got 8 minutes left in the session, and we wanted to bring discussion to what remains for this working group. Should I flip up the text-heavy side of this slide? Apologies for all the text. I took the 4 summary points from the interviews, which are very preliminary, and put forward some seed points that are absolutely not the be-all, end-all. Just some senses. The original SoW was very workflow focused, and I think we have seen the difficulties of streamlining. In fact, Tier 2, right, worked on a streamlined workflow for editors, and that was an entire multi-year effort. So I think the question for me, and Danny, you should chime in, like, is to what extent do we stay workflow focused? How do we, and if so, how should we deal with these emerging results related to, in particular, the learned societies? What do we do with that piece of information since it's coming through quite clearly? I think there's a range of things that you could do, but we want to stay scoped, and we want to be aware of the need to drive to some closure here. Any perspectives on that?
Okay, so like our 6 months is up. Sorry, our working group is up.
Unless we ask for an extension to finish the work.
Yeah, you can get an extension for one more. I'm not worried about that. And look, just while we're talking about it, the sessions for P26 are due on the 14th of November. So that's going to crash on us pretty quickly.
Well, we got a working group meeting next week, so
Yeah,
no
anyway,
problem.
just letting you know.
Yeah.
Given the delays we had, I don't think we're going to get finished, but I guess we just need to keep battling on.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think given the amount of work that we put in for the interviews, and I think the interviews are really rich.
Oh, thank you.
I think we're halfway done with the interviews. The interviews are coming out with some really rich content. I think we should, at least put a bow on that, even if it does require extension. I think the question here is, do we just stick with just that? And is there anything on the screen now that, to Natalie's point, zeroing in on the learned societies and their role, I think would be helpful to elevate out of this work. But is there anything else that we should be really looking at, like that larger block of focusing on core actions?
And just briefly to what you just said before the core actions part, it also could be that we say this working group, here, we're at time, here's time, and here's this interest group spinning up, and the interest group can take the output of us as their first input and say, let's dig in on the learned societies.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah. Shannon's got something. Yeah. Oh. Sorry. I thought you had something to say. Sorry. Yeah.
I'm wondering, it seems you have put all this effort in, but there are 72 members in the working group. How can others help to optimize those remaining 6 months? Is there a way to outsource?
Yes. So I think two things to that point that we're thinking. Well, one we're thinking about. One is going to happen. The working group is going to receive de-identified quotes that are keyed to each of the questions. So they will engage with the. They will have the opportunity to engage with the data that we collected, and so I think for the working group next week, I have an agenda item of, to what how do we pick up the tempo a little bit? We're currently meeting once a month. I think this is going to require maybe more than once a month, and supporting the international time zones more aggressively as well. So, but allowing people, making sure that those 72 members plus have an opportunity to come and look at the results, because it's not very satisfying to sit here and have 4 quotes thrown at you. So and that's not what we want, right? We need people's eyes on it.
It was, for me personally, I think it was frustrating to realize the constraints of IRB and the allowable corpus of people who are capable of doing the work. Like, you've gotten your IRB, but then you can't have everybody on the working group doing the interviews.
Yeah.
And that was sort of a revelation, not having done IRB work. So we're in the constraints of the IRB, but opening that up afterwards and really leaning on the rest of the interest group membership to carry it over the goal line, I think.
Yeah, and then I think the second thing, Kirsten, to your point, is one thing related to these kind of core actions piece that I think we could still open up, which would be to focus on core tangible elements that data repositories, things that data repositories may be doing or are not doing in terms of provisional DOIs, supporting blind peer review, supporting workflow timing of when DOIs get minted. I could see that as a table, and different repositories can come and just input their information in the table. And then we can get a sense of who's doing what in the space, and we, from the interviews, from the qualitative data, we will have some sense of which things repositories have told us, yes, this is working well for us, or which things publishers have said, we're hitting this problem because these repositories don't do X or Y.
I mean, even though I don't expect huge participation in the upcoming AGU meeting, I think we should
Yeah. And we-
try for the Earth and space sciences at least to. Yeah, I want to. Yeah,
And we could take it to CDF in a virtual webinar.
Absolutely.
And have people actually fill it out on the spot.
CDF is much more US
yeah, that's true,
focused,
yeah.
right?
Or an ESIP, yeah. Thank you, Shannon. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're at 10:29, so thank you all for your nice discussion today and for attending this session, and I think we came away with some very helpful results from this, so. Small but mighty, yes. So thank you all for spending the morning with us. Yep.